The morning sun spilled across the small town like a golden blessing, and for once, she allowed herself to believe the day would be beautiful. For years, she had waited for this moment, the day her only son would walk down the aisle, promising his life to the woman he loved. She had dreamed of it through long nights of sacrifice, through years of juggling two jobs, through every penny she saved when there was barely anything left for herself. As she stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the dress she had picked carefully weeks before, her heart swelled with pride. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant navy blue with delicate embroidery at the cuffs. The kind of dress that said mother of the groom without shouting for attention. She dabbed a touch of powder on her face and slipped the old gold bracelet onto her wrist, the one her mother had given her on her own wedding day. She wanted to carry something of her family with her, a reminder that love was worth every sacrifice. When she arrived at the grand church, her breath caught. White ribbons cascaded from the tall wooden doors, fresh flowers lined the steps, and a string quartet was softly playing. Guests in polished suits and glittering gowns laughed as they entered, their heels clicking against the cobblestones. She clutched her small purse tighter and straightened her back, determined to step inside with the same dignity as anyone else. This was her son's wedding. She had every right to be here, but the moment she entered, the warmth in her chest began to cool. She scanned the rows of seats at the front, expecting to find a place reserved for her. Instead, she saw a woman she knew all too well, her ex-husband's new wife, already seated proudly in the front row, surrounded by her daughters, the ones she had raised in luxury. The stepmother's gown glittered under the stained glass light, a deliberate statement that screamed importance. Her heart sank, but she pressed forward, smiling politely at familiar faces, nodding to relatives who returned her smile with awkward half-nods. She walked toward the front, telling herself that of course, her place would be beside her son's father. Whatever their history, she was still the mother. But before she could reach the row, a sharp voice cut through the polite murmur of the crowd. "Oh, you can't sit here." She froze, turning slowly. It was her ex-husband's wife, lips curved in a painted smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This section is for family," the woman added, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Her throat tightened. I am family. I'm his mother." A hush fell over the nearby guests. A few heads turned, and whispers began to ripple. Her ex-husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the program in his hands, as if the words printed there could shield him from the moment. The stepmother leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to stop the whispers from spreading. "You'll be more comfortable in the back row, near the door. You understand, don't you?" Her cheeks burned. The words hit like a slap, each syllable hammering into her pride. She glanced at her son, standing near the altar, adjusting his tie nervously as he prepared for the ceremony. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. She searched for a flicker of recognition, for him to speak up, to say, "No, she belongs in the front. She is my mother." But he looked away. The silence was worse than denial. The stepmother's daughters were watching too, smirks tugging at their lips, as though they had won some silent battle. Guests whispered in closeness, "That's his real mother. Why isn't she in front? Maybe there's a reason." How humiliating. Her body stiffened. She wanted to scream, to remind them all of the nights she had stayed up, mending her son's torn clothes, the meals she had skipped so he could eat, the years of loneliness she had endured while her ex built a new family. She wanted to demand the respect she had earned, not as a guest, but as the mother who gave him life. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly, every muscle in her body trembling as she forced a polite smile. "Of course," she whispered. She turned and began the long walk down the aisle, not to the front row, but past the rows where relatives chuckled uncomfortably, past the rows where neighbors whispered, until she reached the back of the church. Each step echoed louder in her ears than the string quartet's delicate notes. Each step felt like a nail sealing the coffin of her pride. Finally, she slid into a seat near the door. From this distance, the altar looked far away, the flowers blurred, the joy of the occasion muted. She clasped her hands in her lap, fingers digging into her bracelet, willing herself not to cry. She was not a stranger. She was his mother. And yet, here she sat banished to the shadows, her presence treated as an inconvenience. The ceremony hadn't even begun, and already the betrayal stung deeper than any wound her ex-husband had ever inflicted. This was worse because it wasn't just about her. It was about her son, the boy she had raised with every ounce of her strength had allowed this humiliation. She could feel eyes on her, pitying glances from some, judgmental stares from others. A few guests shook their heads, as though she had done something shameful to deserve this. The whispers grew louder, like a tide of gossip threatening to drown her, and in that moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. All those years of sacrifice, all the nights she stayed awake worrying, all the dreams she set aside so he could build his, had it all been for this? To be treated as if she didn't belong on the most important day of his life. Her heart ached, but beneath the ache, something else stirred, a quiet fire. She had come here to celebrate her son, not to fight. But as she sat in the back, the sting of betrayal settling into her bones, she realized this day would not unfold as the stepmother expected. She would not scream, she would not argue, she would not beg for her rightful place. No, she would endure, and when the moment came, the truth of who she was and all she had done would not be ignored. She lifted her chin, refusing to let the tears fall. The whispers around her became background noise. She fixed her gaze on the altar, steady and unflinching. The wedding had begun, but so had something else. Her humiliation was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. As the choir's voices floated gently over the church, her mind drifted not to the present humiliation, but backward, to the years that had carried her here. Memories came unbidden, vivid and heavy, as though her heart could not bear to sit in silence without retracing the road she had walked. She had not always been alone. Once, long ago, there had been laughter in her home. She remembered the day she married her son's father. The promises of forever that had quickly withered under the weight of betrayal. He had left when their boy was barely 7, choosing wealth and glamour with another woman over the family he already had. She remembered the slam of the door, the echo of her child's cries, and the crushing reality of bills piled on the kitchen counter. But she hadn't broken. She couldn't afford to. She worked by day in an office, answering phones, balancing ledgers. By night, she scrubbed floors in a hotel, sometimes dragging her weary feet home just as the sun was rising. On weekends, she picked up extra shifts at a diner, smiling at strangers while her back ached and her feet blistered. Every dollar she earned went into survival: rent, food, clothes for her growing boy. She cut corners where she could, skipping meals so he could have seconds, patching up his worn-out shoes instead of buying herself a new coat, reusing notebooks until the pages were soft and torn. Her life was stitched together with sacrifice, but she never complained, because every time she looked at him, sleeping with his small fists curled around his pillow, she knew it was worth it. She wanted him to have a life beyond struggle, a chance to rise above the shadows of abandonment. She told herself that her pain was temporary, but his future could be permanent. She remembered the first day of high school, when he begged her for a decent pair of sneakers so he wouldn't be laughed at by classmates. She had smiled, promising he would get them. That night, she worked 3 extra shifts back to back, collapsing on the couch in exhaustion when she returned. But she placed the box of sneakers on the table the next morning, watching his face light up with gratitude. That smile had been her reward. Then came college. Tuition loomed like an impossible mountain, but she refused to let him go without. She applied for loans, worked overtime, and even took on private cleaning jobs. There were nights she returned home so drained she could barely stand, but she told herself again and again it was for him. He never knew the full extent of what she did. She never told him about the nights she sat in the kitchen, crying silently into her hands when she realized she didn't even have enough for her own medicine. She never told him how many invitations she had declined from coworkers or friends because she could never afford to spend money on herself. Every sacrifice was hidden, wrapped in silence, because she wanted him to believe his life was as normal as any other boy's. When he finally graduated, walking across the stage in a crisp cap and gown, she had clapped until her palms stung. Tears had blurred her vision, not of regret, but of pride. "That's my son," she whispered over and over, her heart swelling so large she thought it might burst. And now, as he stood at the altar, preparing to marry the woman of his dreams, she thought of the years that had led to this. Even the wedding, the very occasion where she now sat in the shadows, had been partly possible because of her. She had saved for months in secret, cutting down on her own meals and delaying repairs to her home, just to contribute. She didn't want her son to feel the weight of expenses, nor for his fiancée to carry that burden. She had slipped envelopes of money quietly into the bridal fund, never mentioning her name. She even remembered the night the bride-to-be came to her in tears, worried about affording the perfect gown. Without hesitation, she had pressed folded bills into the young woman's hand. "Don't tell him it was from me," she had whispered. "Just promise me you'll look as beautiful as you deserve to on that day." The girl had hugged her, eyes wet with gratitude. Yet here she was, sitting in the back row, unseen, unacknowledged, as though she were a stranger in her son's life. Her chest tightened at the contrast. The years of sacrifice, the silent offerings, the endless devotion, none of it had earned her the respect of sitting beside him on his greatest day. And yet, even in her pain, there was pride. She remembered the first time he had come home with an award, his small chest puffed with pride as he held it out to her. She remembered the countless nights spent tutoring him at the kitchen table, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but her patience unwavering. She remembered the mornings when she walked him to school in the cold, her own coat thin, but her arm firmly around his shoulders to keep him warm. Every memory was laced with love. She thought of the promises she had whispered to him when he was small. "You will never go without. I will always take care of you." She had kept that promise, even when it broke her. And now, as the organ swelled and guests shifted eagerly in their seats, she sat in silence, her heart heavy but unbroken, because no matter how they tried to push her aside, no matter how they whispered and pointed, no one could erase the truth of her sacrifices. She was his mother, the one who had raised him, who had carried him through storms, who had fought battles in silence so he could walk in light. And though he might have forgotten in this moment, the weight of her love was carved into his very being. The disrespect she now faced cut deep, but deep wounds often revealed deeper strength. She straightened in her seat, her fingers brushing against the bracelet on her wrist, grounding herself in the memory of her own mother's sacrifices. The world could strip her of recognition, but it could never strip her of the truth. She had given everything, and one day, whether in whispers or in thunder, the truth of her devotion would rise. The choir's song faded, and she blinked back to the present, her vision clear. Around her, the whispers still buzzed, but inside, she felt the steady hum of quiet power. This was not the end of her story. It was only the shadow before the light. The memory of her sacrifices lingered like a shadow. But what hurt more was the recent shift, the change she had watched unfold in her son during the months leading to the wedding. It was as though a wall had risen between them, brick by brick, until she could no longer reach him the way she once could. At first, it was subtle. He called less often. His visits home became shorter, his tone hurried, distracted. She told herself he was busy planning a wedding, juggling work, trying to carve out his future. She didn't want to smother him, so she gave him space, convincing herself that soon, after the wedding, things would return to normal. But then, she began to notice things that couldn't be brushed aside. He had always been warm with her, eager to share every detail of his life. Yet now, when she asked how the planning was going, his answers were clipped. "It's fine, Mom," he would say, scrolling through his phone. "Do you need help with anything?" She'd offer, "No, Dad and Sandra are taking care of it." Sandra, the stepmother. The name tasted bitter on her tongue. She knew his father had money, plenty of it. Over the years, he had built a business empire, one that afforded him the luxury of sweeping gestures, expensive vacations, designer clothes, lavish gifts. The same father who had once walked away from them without hesitation was now buying his son's affection back in gold and glitter. And her boy was beginning to be swayed. She remembered one particular evening vividly. He had come by to drop off some documents, his fiancée waiting in the car. He looked sharp in a suit she knew she hadn't bought. "You look handsome," she said softly, pride swelling despite the ache. He smiled faintly. "Thanks, Dad got it for me. Said I need to look the part when we meet the hotel manager for the reception." Her heart clenched. She wanted to say, "I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to put you in the position where you even could meet hotel managers and wear suits." But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she forced a smile. "Of course, you do look the part." Later that night, she overheard a conversation that cut even deeper. She had stepped outside to bring them tea when she caught a fragment of his voice through the car window. "Yeah, I know she means well, but Mom doesn't really get these things. She's simple. Dad and Sandra, they understand how it's supposed to be done. You know, big weddings, image, respectability." The cup in her hand trembled. The tea spilled onto her fingers, burning her skin. But the real burn came from his words. Simple. As if sacrifice were simplicity. As if love without money were somehow less valuable. She stepped back into the house, heart pounding, tears stinging her eyes. When he came inside minutes later, she hid the redness of her face, pretending she was fine. She refused to let him see her pain. But the cracks widened. Weeks later, when she asked about the seating arrangements, hoping to catch a glimpse of where she might sit, he hesitated. "Mom, about the front row. Dad and Sandra thought it might be better for appearances if her breath caught. If what? He avoided her eyes. If you sat a little further back, just so there's no awkwardness. She stared at him. Awkwardness. I'm your mother. I know, he said quickly, almost defensively, but people talk. You know how it is. Sandra has, well, she's been really involved in the wedding. She and Dad are paying for a lot of it. And what? Her voice cracked. So my place depends on who pays the bill. Silence. He had no answer. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. I never asked for credit. I never wanted anything but your happiness, but don't you ever forget who stood by you when no one else did. For a moment, guilt flickered across his face. His shoulders slumped, and he whispered, Mom, please don't make this harder. Don't make this harder. The words echoed like a verdict, a cruel reversal of all the nights she had made life easier for him, carrying his burdens so he wouldn't have to. From then on, she felt the distance growing, not just in words but in actions. Invitations to planning meetings never reached her. Decisions were made without her input. She learned more about her son's wedding from whispered updates among relatives than from the boy himself. And yet, she never stopped supporting him. When the fiancé mentioned her worries about the cost of flowers, she quietly slipped money into her purse. When her son fretted about finalizing the suit, she offered to tailor it if needed, though he waved her off, saying Sandra had already arranged everything. Each time she was pushed aside, she told herself, this is his life. Don't burden him, just love him. But love, she realized, was beginning to feel one-sided. One evening, a week before the wedding, he stopped by again. She had prepared his favorite meal, chicken curry with fresh bread, the way he used to devour it after school. She set the table, her heart leaping at the thought of spending time together. But when he arrived, he barely touched his plate, his phone buzzing constantly. Between bites, he muttered about the rehearsal dinner his father was hosting at a country club, about the designer cufflinks Sandra had picked out, about the honeymoon already booked in Europe. She listened, nodding, though each word drove a deeper wedge into her heart. He spoke of wealth and luxury as though they were the pillars of love and success, forgetting the simple joys they had once shared in their modest home. When he finally stood to leave, she tried to catch his arm. Son, she said softly, don't let all of this change who you are. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? I mean, don't forget the value of what money can't buy. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget me. For a moment, he seemed to falter. His eyes softened, his mouth opened as if to respond, but then his phone buzzed again, and just like that, the moment was gone. Mom, I've got to go. We'll talk later. Andy was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway, the uneaten food cooling on the table, her heart heavier than before. She closed the door slowly, leaning against it as tears spilled freely at last. The son she had raised with love and sacrifice was slipping away, pulled by the gravity of wealth, prestige, and manipulation. And though she still clung to hope, she could no longer deny the truth. He was treating her not as the mother who had given him everything, but as an outsider in his new, glittering world. The organ swelled, filling the church with solemn majesty. Guests shifted in their seats, smoothing dresses and adjusting ties, the air thick with anticipation. From her place in the back row, she tried to steady her hands, but they trembled against the small purse resting in her lap. Every detail she had imagined for this day, the flowers, the music, the proud smile she thought she would wear, felt like a cruel parody now. She had wanted to be near her son, close enough to see every flicker of emotion on his face as he began his new life. Instead, she was exiled to the shadows, a spectator at the very moment she had poured her entire life into. Her gaze drifted to the front. There sat Sandra, regal in her shimmering gown, flanked by her daughters like a queen surrounded by ladies. She smiled broadly, basking in attention, leaning close to whisper with guests in the front rows as though she alone carried the honor of motherhood. The mother's chest tightened. She clasped her bracelet, a lifeline of memory, and reminded herself to breathe. The hush deepened as the groom entered. Her son, her boy, looked striking in his tailored suit. The congregation murmured approval as he strode confidently toward the altar. She searched his face, desperate for a flicker of recognition, a glance that might cross the ocean between them. And then it happened. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. Her heart leaped, but before she could draw strength from it, he looked away toward the front row, where Sandra's approving smile awaited him. The sting was sharper than any blade. The ceremony continued, the priest's voice echoing beneath vaulted ceilings. The bridal party began their slow procession, flower petals scattered down the aisle. Guests turned in admiration, phones discreetly raised to capture perfection. And then, just as the bride approached, radiant in lace and silk, the stepmother's voice pierced the air. It wasn't loud, but in the hush, every syllable carried, "She shouldn't be sitting back there," Sandra whispered pointedly, her words meant to be heard. Heads turned, whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. The mother froze. Heat crawled up her neck. Sandra leaned forward slightly, speaking with a sweetness sharpened like a knife. "Everyone's wondering why she didn't sit in the back row earlier. That's where she belongs." A gasp fluttered among the guests. Some faces turned in pity, others in thinly veiled judgment. The bride glanced nervously at her groom, but the son said nothing at all. The mother's breath caught. Back row, the phrase branded itself into her mind, each word dripping with cruelty. She had already endured this humiliation in silence, but now it was public, deliberate, and inescapable. Someone near the aisle whispered, "Isn't that his real mother?" "Yes," another voice replied, hushed but audible, "but I heard she doesn't really fit in with the family." Poor thing. The pity in their tones stung almost as much as the ridicule. She did not want pity. She wanted respect. Her ex-husband shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat, but still, he said nothing. He let Sandra's words hang in the air like smoke. Her son's face was pale. His jaw tightened, but his lips remained sealed. He adjusted his cufflinks, eyes downcast, as though silence could erase the cruelty unfolding before him. For a heartbeat, she wanted to stand, to cry out, "I am not an outsider. I am his mother. Every brick of his future was laid by my hands. Every dream of his was fueled by my sacrifice. How dare you push me into the shadows?" But she didn't. Instead, she straightened her back, swallowing the lump in her throat. Dignity was the only armor she had left, and she would not let them strip it from her. So she stood slowly, her movements calm and deliberate, though her legs trembled beneath her dress. Dozens of eyes followed her. She felt their stares like daggers, but she kept her chin high. Her steps echoed faintly as she walked toward the very back row, the place Sandra had so venomously decreed for her. The whispers swelled around her like a tide. Imagine, on her own son's wedding day. Why doesn't he say something? Money changes people. Always does. She reached the back pew, lowered herself into the wooden seat, and folded her hands once more in her lap. Her heart thundered, but outwardly she was composed. A portrait of quiet grace. Sandra smirked in victory, leaning back against her cushioned chair as though she had secured her throne. The father avoided looking anywhere but the altar, his cowardice plain to all who noticed. And the son. He stood motionless, his eyes flickering briefly toward the back before dropping again. His silence was louder than Sandra's cruelty. The priest cleared his throat and continued, trying to steady the ceremony, but the moment lingered like a bruise on the room. As the vows began, she listened, her ears straining to hear every word despite the distance. Each declaration of love, each promise of loyalty, felt ironic against the reality of her isolation. Her mind drifted back to the countless times she had dreamed of this day, not of grandeur or wealth, but of sitting proudly in the front row, her son catching her eye with gratitude as he spoke his vows. She had pictured holding her head high, knowing she had given him every chance to stand where he now stood. Instead, she sat alone, shrouded by whispers, watching him promise devotion to another while showing none to her. But even in her pain, she refused to break. She clasped her bracelet, steady in her breath. She told herself that strength did not always roar. Sometimes, strength was in the silence, the refusal to collapse under humiliation, the choice to rise above cruelty by not stooping to its level. Yes, she had been forced into the shadows, but shadows cannot exist without light. And somewhere, somehow, light would find her again. The ceremony pressed on, but for her, time slowed. Each moment stretched long and heavy, her dignity tested against the weight of public betrayal. When the bride finally reached the altar, radiant and trembling with emotion, the congregation sighed in admiration. Yet the mother, sitting alone at the back, felt the sting of absence in every breath. Her son stood tall, exchanging vows with his bride, his voice steady and clear. But behind the steadiness lay a silence more deafening than any spoken cruelty. The silence of a son who had chosen not to defend the woman who had given him everything. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry here, not in front of them. If Sandra wanted her to look broken, she would not grant her that satisfaction. So she sat still, shoulders squared, her face a mask of calm, but inside, her heart whispered a truth no one else seemed to hear. I belong here. Whether you admit it or not, I belong. The vows ended. Applause erupted. The bride and groom kissed. The congregation cheering. The organ thundering triumphantly. Everyone rose to their feet, clapping and smiling, their joy filling the church. Everyone but her. She clapped softly, politely, though her hands shook. Her applause was not for the show of wealth and prestige around her, not for the stepmother's victory or her ex-husband's silence. It was for her son, the boy she had raised, even if he had forgotten the cost. And though she sat in the back row, her heart whispered what her lips could not. I am your mother, and nothing, not even this humiliation, will change that. The air still pulsed with applause from the vows when the priest raised his hand for silence. His voice, calm yet commanding, carried easily through the vaulted ceiling. And now, he began, his tone solemn, we bless this union, not only as a bond between man and wife, but as the weaving together of families, of histories, of sacrifices. The congregation stilled, leaning into his words. The mother remained in the back pew, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face composed, though her heart throbbed with quiet ache. But then the priest's eyes swept across the room, and for a moment, he faltered. His gaze landed on her. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, surprise, then certainty. He blinked, as though seeing something no one else could. He cleared his throat, pausing in mid. A murmur ran through the guests. Priests were not known to stumble. Not on such occasions. The silence thickened. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, he set aside his ceremonial book, stepped down from the altar, and began walking slowly down the aisle. All eyes followed him, whispers rising like restless wind. Where's he going? Is something wrong? Why is he looking back there? The mother stiffened, unsure whether to shrink into the wooden pew or hold her ground. Her breath quickened. Surely he wasn't coming toward her. Surely this wasn't another humiliation. But he was. Step by deliberate step, the priest made his way to the back of the church, his robes brushing against the carpet, his expression intent. When he reached her row, he stopped, looking down at her with eyes both kind and piercing. My child, he said softly, though his words carried to every corner of the church. Why are you sitting here? At the back, gasps erupted. Guests twisted in their seats, craning to see. Sandra's face paled, her triumphant composure cracking. The father frowned deeply, shifting in discomfort. Even the bride turned, bewildered. The mother's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at him, stunned, caught between fear and awe. The priest's gaze softened further. Do you think I do not remember you? A murmur spread through the pews. The priest looked around the church now, addressing everyone. This woman, he declared, his voice resonant, once walked into this very parish many years ago when we were on the verge of closing. The roof leaked. The lights had been cut. I prayed for a miracle, and it came in the form of a woman who asked for nothing in return. She gave what little she had, quietly, anonymously, so that this house of God could remain open for all of us. The church fell into stunned silence. The mother's eyes widened. She had never expected this. She had donated quietly, slipping what savings she could spare into an envelope years ago, never speaking of it to anyone. It had nearly emptied her account. But she had done it because faith and community mattered to her son. She hadn't wanted recognition, and yet, here it was, thrust into the light. She saved this church, the priest continued, his voice rising with conviction. Without her, this sacred space, this very altar where we stand today would not exist. Many of you were married here. Many of your children baptized here. We worship here because of her sacrifice. Gasps filled the air. Whispers broke into astonishment. Her, impossible, she's the one sitting in the back. I had no idea. Sandra shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her cheeks flushing crimson. She fumbled with her clutch, searching for a distraction, but none came. The father avoided the priest's gaze altogether, his jaw clenched tight. The son looked frozen, his eyes darting between the priest and his mother. His face betrayed a storm of emotions, confusion, shame, disbelief. The mother felt heat rise to her face. She shook her head faintly, whispering, "Please, father, no, it was nothing. I didn't want." But the priest raised a gentle hand, silencing her. "You may wish for silence, my child, but truth demands a voice." He turned back to the congregation. "And the truth is this. The woman you placed in the shadows, the woman asked to sit in the back row, has done more for this community, for this family, than many who sit in the front." The church buzzed with unease. People exchanged glances, their earlier whispers of pity now replaced with something else. Emotion, guilt, respect. Sandra's mouth tightened. Her carefully constructed illusion of superiority wavered. her dominance challenged in front of the very crowd she had sought to impress. The priest looked directly at the son now. "And you, my boy, do you understand who your mother is? Do you see her, not just as the woman who bore you, but as the one who sacrificed endlessly for you, for your future, for even this very day?" The son swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, his lips trembled as though to speak, but still no words came. The silence that followed was thick with judgment, not from the priest, but from the truth itself, echoing through every soul in that church. The mother lowered her head, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She had never wanted attention, but in that moment, with the priest's words washing over her, she felt something she hadn't in years. The priest extended his hand to her. "Please," he said softly, "you do not belong at the back. You belong where honor is given, at the front, beside your son." The gasp that followed was collective, like one great exhale. The mother's breath hitched, her hands trembled in her lap. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she rose. The congregation watched, stunned, as the priest gently guided her up the aisle. Her steps echoed, heavy with history, with sacrifice, with pain, and with dignity finally restored. Every face turned toward her now. Some shone with guilt, others with admiration. Even those who had judged her earlier found themselves unable to meet her eyes. She passed Sandra, who sat rigid, her smile brittle, her knuckles white against her clutch. The father shifted uncomfortably, his shame written plainly across his features. And then, at the altar, she stopped. Her son stared at her, his face pale, his expression torn between pride and regret. The bride's eyes softened, sympathy flickering across her features. The priest turned to the congregation once more. "Let us remember, on this sacred day, that honor does not come from wealth or appearances, but from sacrifice, from love, from selflessness. Today, we celebrate a union. Yes, but let us also celebrate the mother whose sacrifices made it possible." The church erupted in applause. Genuine, thunderous, heartfelt applause. The mother's chest swelled. For once, the tears she fought could no longer be held back. They spilled silently down her cheeks, not of humiliation this time, but of long-awaited recognition. She clasped her bracelet once more, whispering to herself, "At last, they see me." The mother's steps had barely settled into the front pew when the priest lifted his hand once more, silencing the crowd that still buzzed from the revelation. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of judgment and compassion alike. "Now that we have restored this woman to where she belongs," he said, his gaze sweeping across the rows of stunned faces, "there is more to be spoken. Truths that have remained hidden for too long." Sandra shifted uncomfortably, her spine stiffening as though anticipating a blow. The father cleared his throat, his discomfort visible. The son avoided his mother's eyes, staring at the polished floor, as though it might swallow him whole. The priest continued, "You all see her now, but for years, she chose to remain unseen. And yet, she gave more than many who stand proudly in the light." The words pierced the air like arrows. The congregation leaned in, sensing the weight of what was to come. He turned toward the mother, his voice gentle. "You need not speak, my child. I will speak for you, because your humility has kept you silent too long." She shook her head faintly, her lips trembling. "Please, Father," but he pressed on, resolute. "This woman not only kept this church alive, she kept her family alive in ways few here could ever imagine." A ripple of curiosity swept through the crowd. Whispers fluttered. "What does he mean? What else did she do?" The priest raised his hand for silence. Then, with deliberate clarity, he spoke. "She worked tirelessly, holding 2, sometimes 3 jobs, so her son could have the schooling his father's wealth did not provide. Every exam fee, every uniform, every book paid for by the sweat of her labor." The son's head snapped up, his lips parted, his eyes wide with shock. He whispered hoarsely, "Mom, you never told me." The priest's gaze did not waver. "She did not tell you because she did not seek praise. She did not want gratitude on your future. But that future was not built by privilege, it was built by sacrifice." Gasps spread through the church. Relatives who had once gossiped about her simplicity now exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of what they had thought. The father stiffened, his jaw working. "That's not entirely true," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I contributed." The priest fixed him with a steady look. "When, after the divorce, when you walked away, or later, when guilt turned into money that could never replace love." The father fell silent, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. Sandra's lips curved into a thin smile, though her eyes darted nervously. "Father, with respect, "This is not the time, for it is precisely the time," the priest interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like a blade. "For too long, appearances have mattered more than truth, but in this house of God, truth will not be silenced." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. The priest turned back toward the bride, who sat trembling slightly, her hand clutching her bouquet. "And you, child, did you know that when you worried you could not afford the gown of your dreams? It was not Sandra who solved your burden." The bride's eyes widened. "What?" The priest's gaze softened as he nodded toward the mother. "It was her." Quietly, without word or recognition, she gave what she had saved, so you could walk in the dress you desired. She even asked the tailor not to reveal her name. A stunned silence fell. The bride looked at the mother with tears brimming, her lips trembling. "You, it was you. All this time." The mother blinked back her own tears, shaking her head faintly. "It wasn't much. I just wanted you to feel beautiful, the way a bride should." The bride let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. She looked toward her groom, toward the son who sat frozen in disbelief, his face drained of color. The whispers grew louder. "She paid for the gown. All this time, we thought the stepmother. What else did she do?" The priest raised his hand again, his eyes blazing with righteous conviction. "And even this wedding, this very celebration that so many have admired, could not have been what it is without her hand. Funds you believed came from elsewhere. They came, in part, from her. She gave what she could so that her son's day would shine, though no one would ever know it." The revelation hit the crowd like thunder. Gasps, shocked exclamations, stunned silence, every reaction rippled at once. The son staggered to his feet, his face stricken. No, that's not possible." Dad and Sandra, the priest, cut him off. "Yes, they gave from abundance, from wealth they could spare without blinking. But she," he pointed to the mother, "she gave from nothing, from empty pockets, from late nights of aching bones and weary eyes. She gave when she had nothing left to give. That is sacrifice. That is love." The son's knees weakened. He sat back down heavily, his hands covering his face. Sandra's composure faltered completely now. "Father, this is highly inappropriate. This woman, she's exaggerating. Surely this is just enough," the priest said firmly. His voice rang with finality. "The truth has spoken, whether you wish to hear it or not." The crowd turned their eyes to Sandra and the father, their earlier admiration crumbling into judgment. The carefully crafted image of superiority began to shatter under the weight of undeniable truth. The father leaned forward, his voice low but audible. "Why didn't you tell him?" His eyes flicked to the mother, resentment mixing with something like regret. "Why keep it all hidden?" The mother finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Because love isn't about keeping score. Because I didn't want my son to grow up thinking he owed me anything. I wanted him free to choose his own life, without feeling bound to repay me. Isn't that what a parent does?" Her words hung in the air, like a hymn, quiet yet thunderous. The guests fell into silence. Some wept softly, others stared at her in awe. The son finally raised his face from his hands, his eyes red and swollen. He looked at her for the first time in years. His lips trembled as though to speak, but the weight of shame pressed heavily against him. The priest's voice broke the silence once more, quieter now, almost tender. "And so, my children, let this be the lesson today. Wealth can buy appearances, but only sacrifice can buy love. The truest gifts are those given in silence, without demand, without recognition. Those are the gifts that build lives." The mother bowed her head, her tears slipping freely now, but for the first time, she did not hide them. She let them fall, unashamed, in the presence of truth. Sandra clutched her husband's arm, whispering urgently, "Say something, stop this." But the father only shook his head, his eyes hollow. He had no words. The tension hung heavy, the crowd buzzing with the weight of what had been revealed. The sun sat broken between two worlds, the glittering promises of wealth and the undeniable truth of sacrifice. Suspense lingered in every corner of the church. All eyes turned to him now, waiting. Would he rise to defend his mother at last? Or would silence betray her again? The ceremony, once a celebration, had become a reckoning, and the son, the very reason for it all, stood at its center caught between betrayal and redemption. The silence after the priest's words was suffocating. It pressed down on every corner of the church, demanding something to happen. Every eye was fixed on the son, who sat motionless, his shoulders trembling, his fingers dug into his knees, his chest rising and falling unevenly, as though he could not draw breath. At last, He rose. His chair scraped against the marble floor with a sharp sound that made the guests flinch. His face was pale, his eyes red and wet. He looked around the room, the judgmental faces of relatives, the shocked expressions of friends, the bride's anxious eyes, and finally, he turned toward the one person he had been avoiding all along, his mother. Her gaze was calm, though her cheeks were damp with tears. She sat still, hands folded neatly in her lap, as though she had already surrendered to whatever was to come. But there was no weakness in her posture, only quiet dignity. The son's chest tightened. That dignity, that strength, that broke something inside him. "Mom," his voice cracked, raw with desperation. He staggered down the aisle, past the priest, past the whispers, past the condemning stares. His knees buckled as he reached her, and before anyone could stop him, he collapsed onto the floor at her feet. Gasps rippled through the church. "Please," he choked, clutching her hands with trembling fingers. "Please forgive me. I was blind. I was selfish. I let them convince me that money mattered more than you. I let them make me ashamed of you when I should have been proud. I don't deserve to call you my mother. But please, please don't turn away from me." The congregation erupted in hushed murmurs. Some wept openly at the sight. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The mother's hands trembled in his grip, her tears falling silently onto his bowed head. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at her son, the child she had raised through hunger, through exhaustion, through endless nights of sacrifice. And now, the man who knelt before her, broken by guilt. "Stand up, my son," she whispered finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He shook his head violently. "No, I can't. Not until you forgive me. Not until you say you'll take me back. I don't care who's watching. I don't care if they all think I'm weak. I don't care. I just need you." The mother inhaled sharply, her heart torn between compassion and the steel she knew she needed now. Slowly, she pulled her hands free of his grip and placed them gently on either side of his face, lifting it so he was forced to look at her. His eyes were desperate, shimmering with regret. "Forgiveness," she said softly, the word hanging in the air like a fragile thread. "Forgiveness is not something you can beg for on your knees. Forgiveness is something you earn by your actions, by your respect, by how you choose to live after this day." Her words cut through him deeper than any rejection could. His lips trembled, his tears spilling freely as he whispered, "I'll do anything, anything. I swear, I'll make it right." She shook her head slowly, her expression a mix of sorrow and strength. "You can't erase what's been done. You can't undo the years I stood alone, the moments you looked past me, the shame you carried because of me. But you can decide, from this day forward, who you will be, not for me, for yourself." Her voice grew firmer, carrying across the pews. "You want my forgiveness? Then respect me, not because I demand it, but because I deserve it. Not here, not for Shalavit, every day, when there's no crowd watching." The son sobbed, his shoulders shaking as he pressed his forehead against her hands. "I will, I promise. I'll never let them come between us again. I'll prove myself to you. Mom, I swear it." The mother closed her eyes, her tears finally flowing freely. She stroked his hair as she had when he was a boy, her heart aching with both love and pain. The congregation sat spellbound. They had seen humiliation, they had seen truth, but now they saw something even greater. Reversal of power. The mother, once cast aside, now stood tall in her dignity, while the son, who had sought validation from wealth, knelt as a child humbled by love. Sandra's face was rigid, her jaw tight. She hissed under her breath to her husband, "Do something. This is humiliating." But the father only shook his head, staring at the floor, his shame too heavy to bear. The priest stepped forward then, his voice gentle but solemn. "This is what truth does. It humbles the proud and lifts the humble. Today, this son learns what every child must, that respect cannot be bought with gifts or wealth. It must be given to the one who has earned it with love." The bride, who had sat frozen all this time, suddenly rose. Her bouquet fell to the floor as she joined her fiancé, kneeling beside him. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at the mother. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have thanked you for everything you did for me. I don't deserve your kindness either, but I swear I'll honor it for the rest of my life." The mother's heart swelled. She touched the bride's cheek gently, her smile faint but sincere. "Child, you owe me nothing, but if you love him truly, then respect me by helping him remember where he came from. That will be enough." The bride nodded through her tears. The son clung to his mother's hands once more, his voice breaking. "I don't just want your forgiveness, Mom. I want to be worthy of being your son again." Please, give me the chance to prove it." The mother leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against his. Her whisper was so soft it barely carried, but every ear strained to hear it. "You were always my son. You lost your way, but you can find it again. The chance is yours. But do not waste it, because respect once broken is hard to restore." The son sobbed openly now, nodding furiously. "I won't waste it. I swear to I won't." She pulled him into her arms at last, holding him tightly as though shielding him from the very world that had turned him against her. The applause that rose in the church then was not loud or thunderous. It was slow, deliberate, reverent, a recognition not just of reconciliation, but of the mother's strength, of her dignity, of the balance finally restored. Sandra's painted smile had disappeared entirely. She looked like a statue cracking under its own weight, her eyes wide with disbelief, her grip on her husband's arm frantic. But he did not move, his face ashen. The priest, standing above them, lifted his hands. "Let this be the true blessing of this day, not the joining of wealth and appearances, but the healing of what was broken, the restoration of what was cast aside." The mother held her son for a long time, then slowly eased him back, brushing his tears with her thumb. "Now," she said quietly, her strength unshaken, "stand. Don't kneel before me again. Walk beside me with respect." The son nodded, rising shakily to his feet, his hand still clutching hers. And in that moment, everyone in the church knew the balance had shifted. The mother no longer stood in the shadows of betrayal. She stood tall, radiant in her dignity, while the son bore the weight of repentance. It was not humiliation that defined her now, but honor. The tension in the church had shifted. What had begun as Sandra's stage, her carefully orchestrated pageant of wealth and control, was unraveling before her eyes. Where once whispers had praised her gowns, her diamonds, her sharp smile, now the whispers carried a different tone: judgment, condemnation, curiosity laced with disgust. Sandra felt it like needles under her skin. The way people stared at the mother now softly, admiringly, as though she were the true guest of honor. The way heads tilted toward her, nodding with respect, with pity. It was unbearable. Her crimson lips curled into a bitter sneer. She rose from her chair, her heels clicking furiously against the polished floor as she stepped forward, her voice slicing through the fragile silence. "Are you all fools?" she spat, her eyes sweeping across the congregation. "Do you not see what's happening here? She's playing you. She's always played the victim, crying about her struggles while pretending she made sacrifices. A donation here, a handout there, she does it for attention, not love." The guests flinched at her venom, the harshness of her tone echoing in the church. Sandra gestured sharply toward the mother, her jeweled hand trembling with rage. "Do not be deceived. I gave this boy a future. I gave him refinement, opportunities, access to people who matter. What did she give him? Scraps, pity. She's trying to steal the glory of this day. My son's day, our day, and you're all letting her." Gasps filled the room, but not the kind Sandra had hoped for. Instead of agreement, the crowd recoiled at her words. Faces hardened, eyes narrowed, some lips curled in disgust. From the back, an older aunt rose, her voice sharp as a blade. "Scraps. You call a mother's sacrifice scraps? We all know who worked night and day to pay for his schooling. We know who went without so he could eat, who walked miles in the rain so he could take the bus. Do not twist truth, Sandra. We've watched with our own eyes." Sandra's jaw tightened, her composure cracking. She tried to regain control, raising her chin higher. Lies, exaggerations spun to make her seem noble. "She's manipulated all of you, and now even the priest dances to her tune." But another voice cut through the air, this time a family friend. "Manipulated? Sandra, the only one who's manipulated is you. We've seen you parade your wealth, belittle her at gatherings, and push the boy away from his own mother. You've always feared her strength, because no jewels can buy what she has: love." The murmurs grew louder now, no longer whispers but open defiance. Words rippled like waves. "She's right. Sandra has always been cruel. That poor woman. Such dignity." Sandra's chest rose and fell in furious rhythm. She turned desperately to her husband, gripping his arm. "Say something. Tell them it's lies." But he would not look at her. His face was pale, his eyes downcast, shame written in every line of his body. When at last he spoke, his voice was broken, hollow. "I can't," he muttered, "because it's true. Sandra froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. What did you say? The father lifted his head, meeting the eyes of the crowd for the first time. It's true, he said, louder, his voice thick with regret. She, my first wife, she gave everything for our son, and I abandoned her. I chased wealth and appearances, thinking they would make me respected. But I see now, I see what it has cost me, what it has cost him. The murmurs turned into an audible stir. Heads shook in pity for the man, but more in contempt for Sandra. She felt the weight of their stares like 100 daggers. No, Sandra shrieked, her voice breaking. No, you will not turn this against me. I built this life. I gave a standing. A guest interrupted sharply. It was the bride's uncle, a stern man whose voice carried authority. What standing is left for you now? You've mocked a mother on her son's wedding day. You've shown us all that beneath your riches lies nothing but cruelty. Standing is earned, Sandra, not bought. The words hit her harder than any slap. She faltered, her breath ragged, eyes darting frantically as if seeking an ally in the crowd. But none met her gaze with warmth. Only coldness, only disdain. Sandra's voice trembled now, her bravado cracking into desperation. I only wanted what was best for him. I wanted him to rise higher than she ever could take him. What's so wrong with that? From the front row, the bride spoke, her voice calm, but laced with quiet fire. What's wrong is tearing a mother down to make yourself look higher. What's wrong is forgetting that the one who raised him gave him the wings you claimed to polish. Without her, there would be no wedding, no groom, no future. And today, everyone sees it. Tears stung Sandra's eyes, but they were not tears of remorse, they were of humiliation. She turned to the guests once more, but their faces were closed, unforgiving. Even those who had once clung to her circle of influence now avoided her gaze, afraid to be associated with her downfall. The whispers grew harsher now, no longer soft with pity, but edged with contempt. Cruel woman, heartless, money can't hide emptiness. The father buried his face in his hands, unable to shield her any longer. And in the center of it all, the mother remained silent. She had not lifted a finger, had not raised her voice. Her dignity alone had turned the tide. Sandra's breath came in ragged bursts. For the first time in years, she felt small, stripped of her armor of diamonds and arrogance. She turned, searching for an exit, but the aisle that had once been her runway now felt like a gauntlet. Every step she took was heavy, her heels echoing like hammers in the church. Her once confident stride was reduced to something broken, almost stumbling, as if the weight of judgment clung to her ankles. By the time she reached the doors, her face was streaked with mascara, her hands shaking. She glanced back once, hoping, praying that someone would call her, defend her, save her pride, but no one did. The doors closed behind her with a thundering finality. Silence followed, and then, as though an unspoken agreement passed through the room, every pair of eyes turned toward the mother, not with pity anymore, but with reverence. The priest's voice carried softly into that stillness. Honor has found its rightful place today. And so, while Sandra crumbled under the weight of her own bitterness, the mother rose in quiet triumph, not through shouting, not through vengeance, but through the dignity she had never surrendered. The church had never felt so silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what the mother would do next. The eyes of every guest bore into her, but not with the disdain that had greeted her earlier. Now, there was reverence and aching, collective awareness that this quiet woman, humiliated and cast aside, had been the true heart of the day all along. At the altar, her son trembled. His hands, still clutching the vows he was supposed to read, shook so violently the paper rustled like dry leaves. His face was pale, his eyes swollen with shame. And when he finally looked at her truly, looked at her, his voice cracked under the weight of everything unsaid. "Mom," he whispered, though the whole church heard it. Then louder, desperate, "Mom, please, please come to the front. Sit where you belong." The words rippled through the pews like a wave, carrying shock and awe. Guests murmured, some smiled, hopeful, others dabbed at tears, believing this was the moment when the story would write itself, when the wronged mother would be restored to her rightful place. But the mother did not move. She sat in her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight. The dignity she carried was like a crown, invisible to all, but impossible to ignore. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, meeting her son's eyes. They were filled with desperation, regret, and the kind of helplessness only a child can feel when begging forgiveness from the one person who gave them everything. Her voice, when it came, was steady, gentle, and yet it cut sharper than any blade. "My son, she began. You asked me to sit where I was not wanted. Do you not see? A chair in the front row does not give me honor. A name on a program does not give me respect. These things should have been mine without asking, without pleading. Because I am your mother. Her words fell heavy in the silence, pressing against every heart in the room. The son shook his head, tears spilling freely now. I was wrong. I was blind. I let them turn me against you. Please let me make it right. Don't leave me in shame. The mother's eyes softened, though her resolve did not waver. Shame is yours to carry until you learn how to treat love with truth. I carried you in my arms when I had nothing. I carried you in my heart when I had no one. And today, when you asked me to sit at the back, I carried my pride in silence, because that is what mothers do. But dignity, my son, is not a gift I will let you take and return at your convenience. It is mine. Gasps sounded across the pews. Some nodded, others wept openly. The bride pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her own tears flowing. The son stumbled down from the altar, crossing the aisle toward her, his voice breaking. Then, let me earn it back. Please, Mom, don't leave me. Sit here, just once. Let me show them you matter. She rose, then not in anger, but in quiet grace. Her figure seemed taller, stronger, as if years of sacrifice had crystallized into a strength unshakable. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands, the way she had when he was a boy with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. My child, she whispered, her thumb brushing away his tears. I don't need to sit in the front for them to know I matter. They already know. You already know. My place in your life is not measured by where I sit at your wedding. It is measured by the years I gave you, by the nights I stayed awake so you could dream, by the hunger I bore so you could eat. That place cannot be erased, no matter who tries. Her words trembled with love, but beneath it lay steel. The son clutched her hands, begging still, but she shook her head softly. No, she said, I will not sit in a chair that once symbolized rejection. My respect does not begin today. It began the day you were born, and though I forgive you, I will not play a part in rewriting this moment to soothe your shame. You must carry it, and you must learn from it. Her son fell to his knees before her, sobbing. Please, Mom, I can't do this without you. Don't leave me. Not now. The crowd was stunned. To see a groom, proud and dressed in splendor, reduced to a child again, it was almost too much to bear. Some wept for him, others for her, but all watched in rapt silence. The mother bent, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Her tears fell then, warm and real, but they did not weaken her. I am not leaving you, she whispered. I am simply walking away from a moment that does not define us. This wedding is not my proof. You are, and one day, if you live with truth, you will understand. And then, though it tore at her heart, she stepped back. She turned, lifting her chin, and began to walk toward the doors. The hush in the church was deafening. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than Sandra's had before, but the sound was different. It was not the stumble of defeat, it was the stride of someone who had chosen dignity over spectacle. Guests rose to their feet, not to block her way but to honor her. Like an unspoken ritual, one by one they stood, watching her pass. Some bowed their heads, others clasped their hands together. Many whispered blessings under their breath. Her son reached after her, but she did not turn back, not out of cruelty, but because she knew, if she did, her strength might falter. And she had made her choice. At the threshold, the priest's voice called softly, almost reverently, sometimes the holiest act is not to stay, but to leave with grace. The doors opened, and the sunlight poured in like a crown upon her. She stepped into it, her silhouette framed in gold, and for a moment, she looked less like a humiliated guest and more like a queen departing her throne. Behind her, the son collapsed into the pew, sobbing into his hands. The bride touched his shoulder, her own face streaked with tears, but no words could comfort him. The crowd murmured in not of wealth, not of splendor, but of a woman who had shown them that honor cannot be given or taken by others. It is claimed, quietly, within oneself. And so, she left, not defeated, but victorious, not diminished, but magnified. Her absence would haunt the rest of the day, carving into every heart the truth she had spoken, that appearances fade, but dignity endures. The sunlight outside the church felt warmer than the air inside had ever been. The mother stood for a moment on the steps, her hands folded before her, listening to the muffled echoes of the ceremony continuing without her. Bells rang faintly from above, but she did not look back. She had walked away from humiliation, walked away from desperate pleas, and in doing so, she had walked into something far more powerful, her own peace. As she took her first steps down the stone path, heads began to turn. Not everyone had stayed inside. A few guests had followed, quietly, respectfully, as if unable to let her leave without acknowledgement. An elderly woman she hardly knew reached out, pressing her hand gently. "You're the bravest mother I've ever seen," she whispered. "No seat could ever hold the weight of your worth." The mother smiled softly, tears brimming in her eyes, but she said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence carried more strength than words. For the rest of the day, the wedding would unfold inside Flower's music. Vows, but its memory would be forever altered. Not because of the dress or the speeches, but because of the woman who had walked out, leaving behind a lesson no one could forget. Later, when the story was retold, and it would be, in whispers across the town, it always circled back to the same image: a mother, humiliated yet unbroken, leaving with dignity that wealth could never buy. Children leaned in to hear, bridesmaids retold it to each other, and elders nodded knowingly. It became less a scandal and more a parable. The moral echoed beyond the church walls. Respect cannot be measured in money or status. Gratitude cannot be replaced with gifts. And those who dishonor the hands that raised them will one day find themselves empty, no matter how rich they appear. That night, alone, in her modest home, the mother lit a single candle. She sat in the quiet, her heart heavy yet strangely free. Betrayal had wounded her, yes, but it had not broken her. She thought back to the long years of sacrifice, the nights of hunger, the mornings of exhaustion, the endless giving with little thanks. She had not endured them for applause. She had endured them because she loved her son. And love, she reminded herself, does not vanish because of one cruel moment, but neither does it excuse disrespect. Her voice, soft but firm, carried into the stillness of the room, as if she were speaking to herself, to her son, to anyone who might one day listen. A child who forgets their mother's sacrifices may inherit wealth, but they inherit shame as well. A child who honors their mother's tears inherits more than money. They inherit pride, blessings, and a legacy that cannot be stolen. Her candle flickered, and for a moment she closed her eyes, imagining her own mother's hands, worn from labor, strong from love. She realized she had simply followed the same path: quiet endurance, quiet giving. Perhaps one day her son would remember, truly remember, and the shame of today would turn into the wisdom of tomorrow. But until then, she was at peace, because dignity, once chosen, cannot be taken away. Inside the church, long after she left, the whispers continued. The priest's sermon shifted, no longer just about the union of bride and groom, but about the holiness of honoring those who came before. His words fell heavy on every ear, shaping the way the guests would tell the story afterward. They asked her to sit in the back, he said gravely, but she walked away with the front row of heaven in her heart. May we never forget that respect is the seat we offer without being asked. The bride wept quietly at his words, clutching her husband's hand. The groom, her son, could not lift his head. His vows were spoken through tears, his joy fractured by the weight of his mistake. Though the guests applauded when the rings were exchanged, the sound felt hollow, echoing against the greater truth of the day, because everyone knew the real legacy of that wedding was not the marriage, but the mother who had walked away. In the days that followed, the story spread further. Neighbors stopped by her home, not to pity her but to honor her. Some brought flowers, others food, but all brought words of respect. "You showed us what real strength looks like. You reminded us what we owe our parents. You left with nothing, but somehow, you left with everything." And the mother, humble as ever, only smiled. "I did what was right. That is enough." As years passed, her son's life carried on. He built his marriage, his career, his family, but the memory of that day never left him. In quiet moments, he would replay it over and over. The sight of his mother rising, the steadiness in her voice, the kiss on his forehead, the image of her walking away bathed in sunlight. It haunted him, yes, but it also shaped him. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild. He sought her forgiveness, not through grand gestures, but through consistent respect, through phone calls, through visits, through listening instead of dismissing. And though she never let him forget the lesson, she did allow him to prove, piece by piece, that he could grow into the man she had always prayed he would be. Her legacy, however, extended beyond her son. Other parents told the story to their children when they complained. Teachers retold it in classrooms when speaking of respect. And every time it was shared, it carried the same moral: honor the sacrifices of those who raised you. For one day you may stand at an altar, and the seat you offer or deny will reflect the measure of your own heart. The mother grew older, her hair silvering, her steps slowing, but the dignity she carried that day never dimmed. People no longer remembered the flowers at the wedding, the gowns, the music. They remembered her, the quiet woman in the back row, who chose not revenge, not anger, but principle. Her story had become more than her honor, had become a lesson etched into the fabric of her community. And in her final years, when she looked back on her life, she did not think of the humiliation. She thought of the candle she lit that night, the peace she felt, and the truth she carried. Wealth fades, appearances crumble, but respect turned, given lived lasts longer than stone, longer than gold. It is the true inheritance we leave behind. And so the story closes not on riches, not on grandeur, but on something far more enduring. A mother, betrayed yet unbroken. A son, humbled yet changed. A community, awakened to the truth. And a legacy that reminds us all, children who betray for wealth lose both family and honor. But those who honor sacrifice inherit something greater than money. They inherit pride, blessings, and a legacy eternal.